made this work. I made this worse. We fell apart 1,000 times, 1,000 times. You moved away. I'm here to stay. I wish I could go back in time, back in time. I'm so sorry that I hurt you so deep. Swear I spent the last few years just trying to change. I'm on my knees and I'm begging you, please. Is there any chance you're thinking about me? If I change my ways, won't you come back to me? Make no mistakes.
Let me go for one day. Let me lose myself again. Give me something for the pain. Always trying to pretend that I'm not living just a lie. Broken heart and shattered lives. Let me go for one day. Let me lose myself. Oh, I knew how this would end. Oh, I knew that it would die, that we would come to this, that we would say goodbye.
You are watching a Healing Element Podcast special. Show your support by subscribing to the Healing Element Podcast YouTube channel. Also, follow us on Instagram at the Healing Element Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Healing Element Podcast. I am your host, Kai Marie, and I am here with my special guest, Brandon Jones. If you've been following us, we've been doing a series called Straight Shots, No Chaser. And this is the last part of the series that we're going to be doing tonight, which we'll be talking about anti-Black racism in people of color communities. So this should be a very interesting conversation tonight. I will say that I actually had a few emails from folks that were looking for it when we had originally scheduled. We had to reschedule, and they're like, "Where did you guys? Did you upload the interview yet?" So apparently, there's some buzz around this conversation tonight. So I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this, Brandon, and of course, folks that are listening, that they can also provide some of their thoughts as well. So that being said, welcome back, Brandon, to the podcast.
It is a pleasure again to be here to have another important and critical conversation that is very timely. You know, as we continue to move forward in this world and we look outside of our community, we wonder who's got our back and how do we have theirs. So I look forward to diving in today.
Awesome. And so with that being said, we, of course, have some topics that we're going to dive into. But before we do that, we have a special announcement. So what we're going to do is actually have Straight Shots, No Chaser. It's going to be a continuing series, and that's going to kick off in July. And so what is that about? Well, we're going to dive into trending topics on the news. Brandon's going to break it down for us and just help us to better understand exactly what we're seeing in the news cycle, because it's important for us as a community to start to think more critically, starting to use logic and starting to begin to make moves based on the patterns that we're seeing versus just pure emotion. So hopefully that resonates with you. Anything you'd like to add to that, Brandon?
I think it's just, it's going to be in the moment as things are happening, just having an alternative and an objective viewpoint on what's going on. We get so many different narratives thrown at us, and it's hard sometimes for us to actually critically think without just responding emotionally. So hopefully this is a platform that people come to where we can respond emotionally, but definitely have an objective response as well to what's going on in the media or just in the world, honestly.
Very true. So with that being said, we're going to play the intro for our new series again that kicks off in July. It's going to be on Thursdays at 7 p.m. CT and 8 p.m. ET. And here it is. Hope you guys enjoy.
Even more vicious. In a time where we're supposed to be uplifting Black voices and protecting Black people, Black men are getting thrown under the bus, and this is just another element of it.
I agree. And one thing, Brandon, that I'm happy that we're doing this is because we are putting everything. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed our intro and that you will join us for the new series again coming up in July, Straight Shots, No Chaser. We'll be talking about trending news topics, kind of breaking everything down, and of course, a platform for you to share your thoughts about what we are seeing play out in the news and also on social media, because there's a lot taking place, a lot of conversations taking place also on different social media platforms as well. So that being said, we're going to jump into our topic today. Again, it's anti-Black racism in people of color communities. And this is a topic that I wanted to have, or I should say discuss with Brandon, because of what I saw again in the news. We saw a whole campaign regarding the discrimination and some violence that was taking place in Asian communities. And we saw the actions that were taking place by the president and vice president to address those issues. We actually did a whole podcast on that as well. So make sure you go to the Healing Element podcast to view that episode. And so with that conversation and just what we've seen trending as far as how our government has taken actions for other groups that are classified as people of color. And we're kind of seeing a different approach to the Black community. So before we dive into kind of dissecting that, I first wanted to talk a little bit about this whole creation of people of color. And also we now are seeing more of the term BIPOC. So Brandon, can you share with us about those origins?
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, if folks aren't in the know and you've never heard the term BIPOC, you will hear it very soon. You're going to hear it tonight, but it's going to come to a neighborhood, a organization, a workplace near you very soon. And what BIPOC is it is an acronym that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And really, it's just a modern version of the term people of color, but the Black and Indigenous pieces have been kind of highlighted and amplified. And this has been going on for the last, I want to say about 4 or 5 years. And this comes straight out of academia, where we need to, and the ideological concept behind it is we need to amplify the voices and the position and the historical trauma that both Black American folks have gone through and Indigenous folks. And then the people of color bucket is everybody who ain't white. They just throw everybody else in that bucket. And this is just a modern version of what we used to call people of color. And we know that term has always been a code term for Black when it comes to grants, when it comes to newspaper articles and talking points on television shows and things of that nature, has always really meant Black folks, just like things like the at-risk youth or working class or working poor. Those are always terms that were code words for Black people. But what BIPOC has done is really teased out the indigenous folks and ourselves. But even within that, it's another one of those identities that Black people have been thrust upon us since we've been here. We've been called everything from enslaved Africans to Negroes to African Americans to Blacks to coloreds. Like we've had so many identity narratives put on us that, again, we're entering a phase where if we can't define who we are ourselves, we're always going to be at the whims of other people to define who we are and craft a narrative for who we are, which is extremely problematic. And even amongst ourselves, we don't even know all the labels that people have for us, and we fight about the ones that we do know. So that's kind of the background and the history of BIPOC. I often joked and said I'm gonna start calling myself Mr. BIPOC because the things that I see going on, that is the direction that we're headed in. And if you ain't getting on the BIPOC train, you are going to be considered the new racist. But we can get on that as we go forward.
Wow. It's so interesting, Brandon, because I saw this, I think it was on LinkedIn, and someone had shared a post about this woman being the first woman of color to have a certain type of higher level position. Now, if you were looking at this woman, she could probably pass as white. And so I find that interesting how I could see how that could create some confusion, because depending on your complexion, you could have access to white spaces or be accepted in white spaces, but also benefit from the people of color grants and other opportunities.
Correct. Yes. And
so I thought that was.
Yeah, that's been happening for quite some time. Even when we look at affirmative action, that was originally developed for Black men to get into the workforce to become more American, but we had other groups who were more politically organized kind of co-opt that actual those bills and those rights and utilize them a lot differently than us, and we get lumped into this minority category, which is, again, this is what BIPOC is. So when you have this label of minorities and there's really no requirements for who gets in, who doesn't get in, then other people will take advantage of it.
Right. And so when we're looking at these different communities who are classified as BIPOC or people of color, we have seen evidence of racism within those communities. And we actually discussed that on our last episode when we were talking about what was going on in the Asian community as far as attacks that they were receiving based on, as far as the news media saying, based on them being Asian. So we did talk about that, but we also spoke about the racism that exists within their community, because Black people are really on the forefront, saying stop Asian hate. And, we're condoning any type of hate or violence against another group, but we really saw members of our community saying, go out and support Asian businesses. And I know that wasn't too long ago that we were saying support Black businesses and try to go to, the Black beauty shops and stores, because we saw so many instances where especially Black women were being beat, hit, dragged out of Asian nail salons and also beauty supply stores. So with that being said, can you talk a little bit about the racism that does exist within these people of color communities?
Absolutely. Well, when groups have come here to America, what has happened is they've been conditioned to assimilate into white culture, white supremacy, and that assimilation process comes with a nice elements of anti-Blackness, and it's easy to find. And again, this is human behavior. This is group dynamics. Whenever you're joining to belong to a group, you have to, in white culture, you have to other people, and it's very easy to do that. And unfortunately, African American folks have been destined to others in the United States. So when it comes to racism, white supremacy, and practicing it, it's very easy to do that when you have anti-Blackness already positioned for you and you have media that carries it out. So that doesn't mean that non-black folks are not scared of black people. They're not scared of us, but they do have the same conditioning that white media, white power, white structures, or white supremacy just has of us. So things like we're lazy, we're shiftless, we're loud, we're aggressive, we're angry, we're thieves, we're brutes, we're rapists. Those are the same things that other groups think. And the crazy part about it, though, Kai, is that those groups also have their own internalized oppressive positions and biased positions amongst those groups. But again, it's easier to galvanize together in white supremacy with your own group and attack other people than attack yourselves internally. For some strange reason, the only ethnic group in the United States that attacks itself very well is black people. We go at it like no other. But when it comes, like other groups, they fight, they argue. White folks are really good. I mean, white folks are very good at, having two different things, two different parties, Coke or Pepsi. They'll argue over all types of stuff. But when black folks argue, people die. Like that's what ends up happening is we get to a point of deep hatred, and then people get hurt seriously. People don't talk to their family no more, or people end up unfortunately losing their life. And this is what ends up happening. So the anti-blackness is what shows up in these other communities. And then that affects how we end up dating. That affects where we live, who our children can play with, what schools folks go to, even support. Like within organizations, you may have a group, you may work in a field that has a group of a particular ethnicity that's larger, and you may be the only black person there, and they ain't really trying to deal with you because they have been fed the same propaganda that black people can't be trusted, that we're dangerous, all these negative things. So the anti-blackness is, I don't want to say it's just as bad as it is with white communities because they don't always have the power dynamics and structure, but it's definitely present.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I've heard consistently, and I would like to get your opinion on this, is that communities that do come over to this country, that immigrate over for opportunity. A lot of times I hear them say, "Well, my family came over, we didn't have anything, and we were able to build and create a nice family for future generations." So because we were able to do that, and many of the members of my community were able to do that, to see black people in the condition that they're in, that leads them to believe that confirms that we are lazy. Have you heard similar type of conversations?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I like UFC. And one of the things that's funny about UFC is that they have fighters from all over the world. And I found a little group of people to watch UFC fights with. So when there's big pay-per-views, we usually go. It was one of my ex-coworkers. We'll go to his house, and he has a bunch of Asian friends. He's a white dude. He has a bunch of Asian friends. I mean, like these dudes, it's like him, the white dude, me and another black dude, and then everybody else is Asian. And it's just like a big old Asian fest. They be bringing a whole bunch of food. They bring all their kids. It's fun. It's a good time, right? But one of the Asian dudes, so I've been watching UFC with them for about 2 years now. And one of the Asian dudes, I mean, we cool. So he was like, "Let me ask you a question." He was like, don't be offended, man. I just really been wanting to ask a black person a question. And you are the closest black person I know. Cool, perfect. What's up? And he asked me, Kai, verbatim, almost what you just said. He said, "Look, man, he was born here." He's like, "I was born here, but my parents came here, I think it was in like the late 80s, early 90s. And here in Minnesota, we have a pretty big Hmong population." So he's a Hmong cat. And he was like, "Man, my parents, they started a little corner store. They built it up, boom, boom, boom. They drilled inside of me and my siblings to just go to school, keep our heads down. We can either take care of the business or we can go and become doctors, lawyers, or business owners or whatever." And they just pushed that on us. And he said, "Brandon," he said, "I grew up around black folks, man." He was like, why did the kids that I grew up with didn't have the same outcomes as me?" He said, "I'm not even cool with most of the kids I grew up with because I kept going forward and then they just stopped at one point. Why is that?" And I had to tell them, well, it has to do with culture and it has to do with historical trauma. And you have to understand that your parents came here with a whole different motive than what my people had to deal with when we were here. That disposition sets a different path. Now, that doesn't give an excuse to why black folks are not progressing collectively on a higher rate, but it does give some context to what has happened to black people. And I say also, your culture allows you to navigate white supremacy a lot differently than black folks' culture does. So as long as you just shut up, keep your head down, and do what you need to do, you can keep moving forward. Now, you may hit a wall at some point, but typically a lot of Asian American folks are more entrepreneurial. I'll say that. You don't see, you don't really see a lot of Asian American folks in particular industries. Like, they don't dominate industry. They dominate just kind of entrepreneurship. So they'll be a little bit in everything. And I said that, and he owns a business. Damn near all the Asian dudes there own businesses, and they're all successful. I mean, they drive Teslas and all that. They're ballers, right? One of the dudes is actually a prince, which is a whole nother story. I'll tell you that. He's a prince back in his home country. Yeah. I don't know.
We got to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, legit. This dude is like legit a prince. I'm like, how are you? Why are you in Minnesota? That's what I was trying to figure out. But for those guys, these Asian American dudes, right? They have always been instilled that in America, you got to get it how you live. That's how we say it in our community, right? You had to get up and go out here and get something. And their parents installed that into them. Their parents gave them some foundation and said, listen, in this country, it's about getting that paper. It's about getting that dollar. Now, they might not have said it like that, but I'm articulating the way that we would say it because, again, we say those things, but the disposition's different. So for us, how are we conditioned and how are we leveraged for economic and political and educational success? You need to shut up and listen to what the teacher says. When you get 18, you getting out of my house. We might mess your credit up before you even get there, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, who you think you grown? This is my house. You don't understand. Like, we're not cultivating success into our young. We are trying to keep them in check so that they don't get harmed by white supremacy. Instead of cultivating our young to compete with white supremacy or defeat it. And that's one of the things where we get caught culturally. It's a cultural issue that we have because we've been subjugated for so long that I think a lot of the fight within us has been tampered down, or it's been redirected to just focus on police brutality and not necessarily on our own development and our own ability to just compete in the society. So that's one of the differences that I see. Now, that's just Asian American community. When it comes to Latinx folks or Latinos, or another thing that we need to mention about BIPOC and some of these terms that we're using, these terms are very fluid. When you learn one term, be prepared to unlearn it and learn a new term. BIPOC, now listen to this. I'm gonna get to Latinx people because this is all connected. BIPOC has, I've heard about a month ago that only Black and Indigenous people can say BIPOC verbally. White people are supposed to say BIPOC. They're not supposed to even say the term. I'm like, exactly. This is the culture that we're in, and we're going to get to that before we end. But I bring up Latinx because that's the term that I use, and some people may see this and say, well, that term's not what we use anymore because it cuts out the mask. I don't know. I don't even know why we can't use it. So either Latin, I've heard Latin, that's a new term, or Latinx. Mm-hmm. Now, some people are like, Latinx, what is that? Latinos, Latinas. It's Latinx because of gender equality issues, okay? Now, Latinx has been cut out because of now think about this, because of linguistic bias issues, because X is not an actual, it's something in the language of Spanish that X is not something that they necessarily utilize. So they're calling it Latin now. So I say all that to say this. In that community, they have a similar disposition. They come here for opportunity. So when they see Black folks, they're also wondering, wow, if they're not Afro-Caribbean folks, they're wondering why y'all can't get it together. I came here with nothing, and here I am. I done started a business. I started from nothing. I'm in construction, or now I'm working as a physician, or whatever the case may be. They have the same thought process because the disposition was different. When I look at Indigenous folks, it's a little bit of a different concept, right? They were already here, so they're fighting to maintain their own land rights and sovereignty. It's a lot different. So they look at us like, well, y'all just causing trouble. I mean, y'all didn't ask to be here, but y'all ain't helping while y'all here. So that's their viewpoint on us. Now, I don't blame them for that, right? But they have their own internal issues amongst tribe versus tribe, and just as a collective, because they don't really see themselves as a race. That's another thing too. So when we're talking about these things, we have to understand that they are cultural dynamics at play, not just racial dynamics. And as Black folks, we have been conditioned to think race just like white folks have been conditioned to think race. And if we just stay in that race box and we don't think culture dynamics, we're going to end up losing where this thing is going, because this thing is really going on culture. It's not just on racism. It's starting to look at how different cultures commingle and relate in this country. So I'll pause there because I threw out a lot in that answer.
Yeah, no, that was great. And so if anybody has any questions, please make sure you drop it in the comment box. If you have any thoughts on what we're talking about this evening, please let us know, and make sure you give this video a thumbs up, like, and share. So a couple of things came to mind, Brandon, when you were talking. One, you're exactly right. We need to look at the cultural differences, which you really can't do that when you kind of merge groups together. When you have BIPOC, everyone in that group has had a totally different experience. And being in the wellness space, a lot of times I see yoga for BIPOC communities or different type of trauma services for BIPOC communities, but everyone has had a totally different experience in this country. So to treat them all the same, it doesn't really make sense, and it's not actually helping the problem. I think we do have a question here. I'll put it up here.
Yeah, I'll get the question in a second too. But just to follow up on what you're saying, you're absolutely right. All BIPOC experiences are not the same. So if you're in these kind of corporate or even nonprofit or government spaces where they're doing anti-racism or diversity, equity, inclusion work, one of the popular things that is happening is affinity groups. And affinity groups, for folks who are not familiar, are when you split the white folks up who work at the organization and you split up the BIPOC people, and they are in their own groups. Now, some affinity groups can be specific. Like I've seen them for women. I've seen them for just like African-American folk, Black folks. But typically, if you see how a lot of this work is happening, you have the BIPOC group and the white group. Now, the thought process behind that is because when it comes to undoing racism, white folks have a different level of work than non-white folks have. But in the BIPOC category, there is different levels of experiences with racism, white supremacy. So that, to me, is not the most helpful. It's good to be in company with those folks. There are some commonalities, but the experiences are extremely different. So my experience as a Black man is going to be very different than an Asian American's experience, or even an Indigenous person's experience. You know, because and then even with the Indian Americans experience from actual India, where they may be more melanated than me, but they get treated a lot different. Now, they experience racism, people making fun of their names, calling them Abu from Simpsons and stuff like that. That stuff happens. But again, they're not getting shot by the police. Like they're not having, low literacy rates like we do in our community. They're not in impoverished housing complexes and things like that. There's not policy that's blocking those people from elevating economically. Those things are not happening. So my experience as a Black man, I'm not going to be able to 100% connect or relate. Another thing that I've seen in these BIPOC spaces is that a lot of times the most vocal people, the people who are doing, the most of the organizing and the planning and things for this are the Black folks. Other folks just kind of sit back and let us be on the front line to take all the bullets in the organization, damn near get fired, while they sit back. They'll agree with us in an affinity group. Then when we out, they real quiet. And that's something that we have to be mindful of as well as we continue to move forward. And sometimes they're not going to have our backs, even if they share the same truths as us.
Very true. And there's one other point that I wanted to mention too that you brought up as far as our experience as Black folk in this country is, do we look at our role here to compete, or is it for white acceptance? And so if we've been conditioned, I think I'm gonna get in trouble. If we've been conditioned for white acceptance, then we're not going to compete, right? Because you don't want to make white people upset. So to make sure that I stay in my place, stay in my lane, I'm going to make sure that I don't do anything that kind of brings some issues for white people feeling uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that we never did that. I'm just saying how we have evolved to where we are now at this point. And of course, there are systems that were put in place to prevent us from competing as well. But if you are coming to this country for opportunity, competition is a good thing, and you know that there's strength in numbers. So if we band together and work together, we can build together, and then that creates a better outcome for the family and for the next generation. Can you speak to that part? If I didn't just throw some fire.
No, you set the fire. You put the gasoline and you do the match. So I got to keep the fire going. That's my job. You know, part of me feels like once integration happened, our plan to compete was done. And what I mean by that was there was a point in time in history where we had no choice but to quote unquote compete because we couldn't do anything integrated. We had to have our own stuff. And there were very few opportunities of integration, and there was a very few interests of integration for a long time from dominant white society. But as we quote unquote integrated, we started to see the racism, how the more refined version of racism and how it creates inequities. During that, one of the things that we accepted with integration was this idea that these folks that we co-live with are going to care about us. They're going to treat us differently. And they've set up systems, social services, to give us things to make it seem like they care, but us not understanding that people are just doing their damn jobs. It doesn't mean that they care about you. They're getting that check because they have bills to pay just like you do. So what I mentioned that because we've gone through about 35, almost 40 years of this whole thing that I call the institutionalized generation, where you have a critical mass of Black people who are chronically dependent on government, social service / nonprofit, assistance, programming. And I say that because what we have not done with that assistance is elevate ourselves. We have created a dependency culture on those things. Those things should be supplemental to help you move up. Other groups use these tools as well, but they don't stay on them forever. That's the dirty little secret. So when it comes to welfare and food stamps and all that stuff we talk about, where we're always down in Black people, other groups are using those, and most of those white groups use them more than we do. But what ends up happening in other communities, not always in the white communities, but in most other ethnic communities, is they leverage those things to the next level so that they're not on them long term. For us, we have not collectively done that. Some people have, but collectively we haven't. What does that have to do with dependency on white folks? Well, that is part of us loving white folks. Think about our current slogans that we're championing, right? Black Lives Matter. What if we actually just think about what that terminology means? Why are we making a statement that's for other people to say that our lives matter? Do our lives matter to us? To hell what everybody else thinks. Like, I don't care if they think my life matters to them. That's not because I haven't asked my question. Do white lives matter to me? I'm not even there. I mean, like, why are we asking? Why is that our number one slogan? That is mind boggling. Think about, amplify our voices. You're asking for permission to speak. Like, we have to think about what's actually being told to us, and we're championing behind. Right? At some point in time, we have to develop some mastery and agency over our own identity and existence and stop looking for white folks to validate our existence. This is why I always talk about, I feel like we have an addiction to whiteness because without whiteness accepting who we are, a lot of us feel like we don't have a place to be. This is why we get extremely excited when we see our children, I know you've seen these postings before, Kai, where it's like, oh, little Keisha from Chicago got 28 scholarships to Yale, Cornell, and Harvard. And it's like, oh, hell yeah. But then, Tamika, she done got into Howard. Nobody gives a shit. It's like, what do we, it's like, we have to stop. We have to break that psychological conditioning and acceptance to whiteness and understand that both of those young women who get into college deserve the same amount of praise. Not just the one who got into Harvard, but also the one who got into the HBCU as well. It's an achievement nonetheless for both. And again, we don't do that because it's the white man's ISIS coder type of situation. So when we do that, what do we tell our children when we do that type of stuff? That this is better for you than this. and it's something that is more exclusively white. Like we have to be very mindful of how we communicate those messages. So we get caught. We only have this conversation as well, Kai, when it comes to beauty standards. But really, the more problematic stuff is beyond beauty. It's stuff that actually impacts your life long term. And we don't always talk about it like that. But at some point, we have to break that kind of psychological, desire to be accepted by whiteness, and move forward and just love who we are for ourselves and not worry about if our life matters to somebody that's not Black. Like you shouldn't care, to be completely honest, if your life matters or not. But again, this is what we're fed and this is what we get behind. And then we start battling amongst each other because we are confused on what's really happening.
Yes, it's so true. And, when I see, there's always images on social media of a little Black boy hugging a little white boy. And and I'm just saying, it's a bigger issue than this. And I know that you have talked about this, and also Dr. Tommy Curry, that when we're looking at racism, this is about a genocide. It's not about someone loving you, hugging you, dating you, marrying you. It's deeper than that. And I think that it seems as though, and you're in academia, so I know that you can speak to this, that we've watered down what racism is so much that it has turned into getting someone to like you, date you, being able to move in the house, in a neighborhood with white people. That has been reduced to that, not as the horrible thing that it is, which is either a quick or a slow death, or Black people.
Yeah, it's all about relationship at this point. And like think about Black Lives Matter, for example, just because that is the number one slogan for us.
Yes.
When do we know when we don't need to use that anymore? Like, how do we know when we've achieved a level of success where Black lives do matter and we can move on? We don't. So why are we championing something that's not even goal driven? What's the purpose of Black Lives Matter? Nobody knows.
Nobody. And the other thing, and someone that got upset when I did this, when I posted this on Facebook, which I've slowed down my Facebook posts.
Yes, you have. I noticed.
But someone, when people are holding signs up and they're saying am I next?
Yep. Oh man.
And I saw this woman, I'm guessing was with her son, and he was holding a sign that says I'm next, and she's holding a sign that says is my son next? And I'm like, who are you asking this to?
Exactly.
What other group? I'll tell you one thing was what happened in the Asian community when there was they were showing the uptick in violence against different members. No one held a sign and said, "Am I next?"
No, they said
they were
stop.
saying, "Oh, yeah, exactly." Yeah. We're going to need Biden and Kamala to come down and meet with our community, and out of that, they got legislation and also economic support
swiftly. But again, when you are politically organized and your community has identity that they don't want to be disrespected, stuff happens, right? I mean, it's just like we see this all the time with other community groups. If someone disrespects a Jewish person or Jewish culture, they are out of there with swift action. I mean, we could talk about Nick Cannon, but there was a basketball coach. I don't know if people seen or caught this article. This is about 2 months ago. There is I don't even know if he was college or high school, not a big time basketball coach, which also lets you know that they don't play. They don't care how big or small you are. They coming for you. This man had 2 plays named after 2 Jewish things that I'm not going to mention because they will take your channel off of YouTube, but they weren't. Apparently they were derogatory terms. Mm-hmm. I read those. There were 2 items in Jewish culture. I did not know that those things were derogatory. One, I'll just explain what they are. One is the I don't know if it's a game, but it's a thing that you spin. Starts with a D. Oh. He named a play after that thing, right? Mm-hmm. That apparently is derogatory. You're not supposed to even mention that word if you're not part of that culture group. I had no idea. And that man got fired because he had 2 basketball plays named after 2 Jewish items. The other thing was after the spiritual leader in the Jewish community. I'm not going to say the name because I don't want to get your channel taken away. It starts with an R and ends with an I. Now, I don't know how that's derogatory, but I respect how the Jewish community responded because they felt like that's something that was not in favor of their community, and they made it happen to get him out of there. Now, I think about how, just let's talk about YouTube for a second. I think about how YouTube, you're on YouTube, you know this. Every month you get an email with the things that are changing, right? You get an email about copyright, you get an email about policies and procedures. And you know what they've never mentioned on on any of those emails of a word that we can't use? Nigga. They have not. You can use nigga all day, but you say anything about any other community, your channel is out of here. They are demonetizing you, getting you out of here. You can say nigga all day, nigga. You can say it all day. And the reason for that is, again,
promote your video.
Yeah, exactly. I should just have the nigga podcast just to see what happens, because I mean that might actually be a good idea. That might blow up. I might have to borrow. Yeah, I might have to do that. That might actually work.
Do that.
But think about that. Think about that. If I had a derogatory term for any other group in any of my video titles, it's done. Even verbally, it's done. But that is a word you can say all day on YouTube. Nothing gets taken down. Nothing happens because we don't have a community that's politically organized. And guess what? You can also be somebody who's not a part of the Black community saying it all day, and no one's coming to take your video down. But again, if we want to talk about having coalitions, I'm going to transition to the next question. We have to be able to have organization, some boundaries and standards within our own community. If we don't have those, we don't have a coalition. When from Talea's question, she says, who determines the indigenous status? Well, technically they do. And the folks within those and there's different levels of tribes. There's bigger tribes and there's tribes that are a little bit smaller. The bigger ones usually have a little bit more political sway and they have more capital as well. And they determine who's in those, who is it considered to be indigenous or not. And they've been able to leverage themselves. And even within that, there are little smaller tribes end up battling and fighting over government funds and things of that nature because they're not getting the same amount of income as those bigger tribes are getting from things like casinos and other financial means based on where they're located throughout the United States. So that's who ultimately who determines it. And I don't know if it's a hinge on time in America, could be, but I do know that they have organized enough to make sure that what needs to happen within their communities can happen. Now, does that mean that they don't have issues and struggles? No, they absolutely have things around alcoholism, child welfare, kids going into foster care, even rape and sexual assault is a big issue with many indigenous populations throughout the United States. Here in Minnesota, we have a pretty big indigenous population, but at the same time, they have enough political sway from a race standpoint because they have organized amongst their tribal groups. Black Americans have not organized amongst ourselves to have that much political sway.
That was a great question. And so for those in our community, so now that I think even Biden has told us that we need to go holler at the Hispanic community if we want anything.
Week 1 too, just laid it out. I don't even know if he swore it in when he said that.
I don't even know. I think after the results came in, he was just like, you're on your own. So I wonder how we as a community are, like, how we're rationalizing that. I kind of have stayed away a little bit from what's been going on politically just for my own sanity. But in saying that, there are steps that we need to take as a community. If you are looking to align yourself with a BIPOC organization or people of color organization, it's important, I would say, to know who you are and also value yourself. Because like you were saying earlier, Brandon, a lot of times we're at the forefront of the type of organizations related to BIPOC, but we're not reaping any of the benefits. And I would even say, even what we saw with George Floyd and everything that came out of that, as far as legislation and financial, economic improvements to our community, we didn't see any of that. We saw Black Lives Matter as an organization walk away with the bag. And one of the, I think she's a co-founder, she's buying like multi-million-dollar homes.
Yep. Patrice
So as a community, how do we begin to, begin to think more critically. And that's why I'm so happy that we're going to be continuing this whole series, because it's all about us thinking critically, looking at news critically and policy critically. How do we begin to do that? So that way, when we do align with a BIPOC or people of color community, we make sure that our issues get addressed, and we just don't we're just not happy to be there, but we actually want to impact some change.
Yeah, and also we're not just galvanizing the change, because sometimes we'll be the loudest voice. We're like the fuel to the engine, and then they run out of fuel, and then they go get a upgrade of fuel once they get to their destination, like they've done with us, and that's what ends up happening. So for us, it has to start with, and I go to Mr. Nellie Fuller Jr. With my answer to this, is it has to start with the united independent effort, which means you as an individual need to develop a code, quote unquote. And the code is not just coming and hitting black people upside the head, because a lot of times we hear about staying on code, it's banging on other black people. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is making sure that your actions are objective and constructive. So when you're seeing news articles or you're watching something, hell, if you're listening to this podcast, whatever the case may be, ask yourself, what does this mean to me? Like, that should be your first question, is what is this person or this thing articulating or trying to say to me? How does this apply to my life as a black person? If you are black, right? And if you're not black, you should ask yourself the same question. But what does this mean to me? And then once you are able to discover that answer, the next question you should ask yourself is, how am I going to apply this to my life to make sure it's constructive? Once you're able to do that, you're working on building your own capacity. But then the next step to that is, how can I find other people who want to create constructive change so I can organize with those people? Like, that's the step that we miss. We think that we need to everybody always says it, but we don't really put it into action all the time. It's like, we need to come together. We need to do this together. Yes, we do, but there's so much trauma and there's so much individual work that needs to happen first, that when we do come together, stuff is usually non-constructive. We're competing, we're fighting with each other, stuff don't get off the ground, we're miscommunicating. Like, we really have to do a deep dive into what does organizing look like, period. Not just political, but organizing for our economic place, our educational place, and our political place. I think are three critical groups for us to study, or to start with. And then also, honestly, I think we really have to work on our male-female dynamics, not just in a romantic sexual place, but just working constructively together where there's no intent of getting anything out of the deal. That is a big struggle for us. One of the things that I try to do, because I always talk about building networks. One of the things that I've been able to see in my career is those who elevate and move forward have networks that they've cultivated. They may have done stuff for free. They may have just kept in contact with people, or they may have just shown up to things, but they built that network, and then that helps them get to that next level. You'll be amazed how many black folks stay in their same position, in their same situation, because they have not built a network. And they may be qualified and good at doing stuff, but they don't get the opportunity because they don't have anybody to vouch for them. We have to start building networks within our community. It's very, very important. And those networks sometimes may be them other BIPOC people that we say we should relate to. And as on an individual level, I would say, those folks may get into what you have not been even invited to. So utilize that. But if you expect that all people that are non-white and non-black are going to have your back collectively, that's not going to happen. But if you can build those individual relationships, you absolutely need to do it.
I think that's great advice. And there's two other things I wanted to add quickly, and this goes along with Neely Fuller, is that you are your own leader. And I say that because I think so many times that I've seen from our communities, if someone passes or is no longer in office, say they retire, then it's like, well, who's going to be the next leader? And you are your next leader. So, and with that leadership comes responsibility, accountability, self-awareness. And so I think it's so important for us to take our power back and be the leaders that we need in our own lives and in our community, because, the powers that be will continuously put black faces in front of us and say, this is your next leader. This is the person that you need to listen to. But if you know that over time, we've seen that the powers that be really are not going to do anything to benefit us, then you have to question the people that they're putting in front of us. So that's why it's so important to recognize that you are the leader in your own life and you don't have to look outside yourself. Doesn't mean that you don't take advice from other people, but you take the advice, you analyze, think about it, see, as Brandon said, see what applies to you, and what doesn't work for you, let it go. What kind of resonates with you, apply it to your life, and to improve your overall quality of life. So that's important that we recognize that we are our own leaders.
Absolutely. You know, a great leader is a great learner, and a great teacher is a great student. Like, you always have an opportunity to learn from somebody else. You should be influenced, and you should know who your influencers are. And I'm not saying social media influencers, like the folks who get 1 million followers on Instagram. I'm talking about people who poured in something to you that you've been able to utilize to move forward. That might be your drunk uncle. That might be, you know, one of your ex-girlfriends. That might be somebody that you don't know, but you at least just follow on social media. They may pour something into you to help you influence your ability to be a leader. And that's important to take those lessons and not just, let those things go or judge people based on who they are, because they may give you little nuggets of wisdom that can help you move forward. But yeah, that's what I think we need to do. And it's important. You know, one of the important things for us to do moving forward strategically is to be able to do that. Take in information, no matter what the source is. If it's constructive, apply it and see yourself as that leader.
Agree. And when you said that, no matter the source, and I'll be honest with you, I have been kind of upping my finance game. And so a lot of the people that I listen to, they may say, it could be, depending on the language that you use, you can tell like, oh, this person has some white supremacist type of tendencies here.
Definitely.
But you know what? The information that they're providing me regarding finance, I'm going to keep listening. And I had to grow to this point, because before I would just close up like, what do you think you're talking about? But I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, this information is going to help improve not only my life, but my family. So I'm going to ignore what doesn't apply to me and get the information that I need. And I think that came through growth of no longer operating out of my emotions, and beginning to use more so logic to say, okay, this is what I need to help improve my life. I don't need to build a relationship with you. I don't need to like you. I need to access the information that you have. And to do that, I have to listen to you. And then after that, I go about my day. And that's it. And I think that's another thing that as we begin to grow as a community, for us to know that we don't have to have these deep level friendships. It can just be, listen, I need some information from a person. I understand that they may not like Black people, but I'm not here for you to like me. I'm here to get information. And then that's the extent of the relationship.
Yep, you don't have to like people to learn from them. That's important, because if you did, you wouldn't learn nothing. Because there's a lot of constructive information from some super racist people, like for real. So again, I'm glad you talked about being able to grow, because if you're not in that space of growth and in a space of self-acceptance, you will allow your emotional response to those races to get in the way of your intellectual ability to keep growing. And that's something that we really have to work on. There are people that I don't trust 100%, but I'll do business with them because it's a benefit for me, and I'm not sacrificing enough of myself or selling out to get that information or get that advantage.
Right, totally agree. And I think, Brandon, that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the different communities, people of color, BIPOC. They're looking at what relationships do I have to build with whoever, then I can leverage those relationships to improve my quality of life. But also it's going to improve my group, because again, there's strength, there's power in numbers. So I think as the Black community, as we begin to see that, and I hope that through what we're seeing play out right now with this current administration, how we were told to vote, it was almost like literally vote or die for Black people. And hopefully we can see, with all souls to the polls, and we have to save the soul of America. I mean, everything, the future of America was resting on the Black vote. And look, what did we get out of that? That was just a lot of emotion, a lot of fear that was being poured into us. And, out of that, of course, if you don't know, you're going to react out of that fear versus beginning to say, wait a second, hold up. What am I getting out of this? And also knowing that you deserve to ask something out of a government that you pay taxes to, that you have fought and died for, I can continue to go.
It's your government. You are American. It's your government. You're American.
With that being said, it is your government. You are American. But it's your right.
I know it hurts, but it's the truth.
It's the truth, right? And I think and this kind of is more of the discussion that we're going to be having when we do the Straight Shots No Chaser in July, that we begin to understand that, voting is part of the process, but you saying, listen, to get my vote, this is what I need to have from you. And I don't know how many times I've been in conversations with members of our community, and it's like, well, they're not going to do anything for us anyways. So then why are you yelling at people to vote? If you believe that the politicians aren't going to do anything for you, then why are you involved in the process at all?
Right.
I don't know.
Whew. Well, we're going to figure it out. This podcast our new podcast is going to definitely move some stuff forward. I can feel it. And we have to, and for me and you, we have to role model that difference too. Because I think what we're talking about logically makes a lot of sense, but people haven't really seen it.
True.
And that's what's important. So we'll keep doing our work, and hopefully you all will keep tuning in to the things that we're doing. So So with that being said, I hope you all have a great night. Again, Brandon, I'm excited. Straight Shots No Chaser. This is going to be awesome. And we're looking into having those difficult discussions, but they will all help us grow, improve ourselves as individuals, our family, and community. So you guys have a great night, and we'll see you in July. Peace.
Even more vicious. In a time where we're supposed to be uplifting Black voices and protecting Black people, Black men are getting thrown under the bus, and this is just another element of it.
I agree. And one thing, Brandon, that I'm happy that we're doing this is because we are putting everything